Hello, my name is Amira Shawi Badawi, and I am a professional certified coach from the International Coaching Federation. I'm a leadership and executive coach, as well as a well being and burnout coach. Over the last 18 months, the word burnout has really just, it's blown up in the media, and you see it everywhere when you're surfing the internet and looking at online articles. Burnout this, burnout that. A lot of people have been approaching me about burnout in the last 18 months since the beginning of the COVID virus. And I mean, there's a lot of questions going on, and I get sent a lot of articles and resources. The last article I got was about why, or the fact that burnout still persists, although a lot of organizations are implementing company-wide initiatives to address this issue. But despite company efforts, burnout still exists, and it's actually growing in numbers. So I decided to kind of maybe share my thoughts on this specific aspect. Now, first, let's start with the definition of burnout. Burnout, it is the psychological response that occurs when a person or an individual is exposed to chronic stress over a prolonged period of time. And this stress, it is of an interpersonal nature in the workplace. So this was the definition of burnout. So let's deconstruct this definition. First, it is a psychological research. Now, if we look at psychology as a discipline, it is fairly young. I mean, psychology, or the thoughts about psychology and about our minds and how minds work, and how our thoughts and emotions and our needs and our motivation and beliefs, all of this kind of rhetoric didn't start until the early 1900s. But even at that point, it was just observation. The application of psychology happened with World War II, and it was mainly in the army and by the military. And then after World War II, there was the commercial exposure, or the public exposure to psychology really happened after World War II. And this is when there was like a scientific boom for psychology. But at that time, psychology viewed it was addressing ailments and diseases that needed to be cured. When we look at burnout specifically, scientific literature for burnout first appeared in 1975, 1976. And also, it was addressing burnout as an ailment that needed to be addressed or cured. And then with the wave of positive psychology that happened in the 2000s, some research started to pivot and ask whether there are certain psychological resources that, if we become aware of, nurture and develop and sustain, we'll be able to reach a state of vocational well-being or professional well-being. And maybe that will help prevent burnout. So the research started to address maybe a correlation between positive psychology and burnout as the erosion of employee engagement. So overall, psychology, burnout, they are both very young disciplines. Burnout is not a new concept. Again, it has been around since the 70s, the mid-70s. But as a discipline, and as for the research, it is very young. So it is natural that, changes are going to occur. And we see this every day. A lot of concepts about the mind, even from how it works as an organ, how it functions as an organ, is changing with new discoveries in neuroscience. So a neuroplasticity also impacts how the mind works, and how coaching can impact the mind. And this is ever evolving. So are there going to be changes to the scientific findings about psychology and burnout, definitely, because again, both of them are still very, very young topics. However, let's examine what is going on in the last 18 months specifically. Is this really burnout? If we go back to the literature never addressed a global crisis, global stress. It was really stress in the workplace. But what we are experiencing now, I think it goes beyond the scope of the research that was done. Since the 70s, has the world experienced a global crisis like the one we are experiencing now? I would say not. There were crises over the last 45 years, but these crises were more localized to certain communities or certain countries. So if you want to understand what we're going through now, maybe it's better to look at the psychological impact of such crises, like maybe look at the psychological impact for the Midwest in America during the recession in the 80s, or look at the psychological impact on the LGBTQ community during the AIDS epidemic, or look at the psychological impact on Americans after 9/11. Maybe this would give us a better understanding about what is going on with us right now, instead of just looking at burnout. Because, yes, a lot of articles call it burnout. Maybe it's just, it's a sexy phrase to use. But if we take that and look into the burnout research, I don't think it's going to help us understand what is going on with everybody now during the pandemic. And also, it's not going to help us to find, ways to address what is going on, because we're not comparing apples to apples, in my opinion. And even if we look at those other situations, we might not be comparing apples to apples, because there has not been a global pandemic since the 70s or since World War II. But at least we might be comparing, apples to pears. So we're not very far off. There would be some correlation there. Another reason why I think burnout will continue to persist and grow within organizations is that a lot of companies now are addressing burnout, and they're starting to implement well-being initiatives and spreading awareness about, psychological well-being and psychological safety in the workplace and all of that. But let's be honest. The companies that did not have these initiatives before COVID and started to implement it after COVID, are they really concerned with their employees' well-being, or is it about the company's well-being and their bottom line? If employees have that even, a shadow of a doubt that these programs are being done for their benefit, they're going to go into these programs with a psychological barrier that is going to hinder, the impact and the progress of these programs. So maybe that's something that companies need to address. Are they really concerned about their employees, or is this just, a Band-Aid that they're using to address a hot topic now? So another thing is also that these are company-wide initiatives, kind of like a one-size-fits-all. Ever since the beginning of my practice in 2017, I would always tell clients and tell people who ask me about burnout. Burnout, the definition, it is a very broad definition. It is the psychological response to chronic stress. However, how people respond to stress differs. So the way people experience burnout is different, although the manifestations would lie into three dimensions, which are physical exhaustion that is actually rooted in emotional exhaustion, callousness and indifference, and the last dimension is lower self-confidence and effectiveness. However, how people experience these things are different, and it's not this one-size-fits-all lens through which we can look at burnout for everyone, and therefore there isn't a one-size-fits-all remedy or methods of prevention that can work for everyone. So having these company-wide initiatives, they might not be very effective. I think a better approach would be to have more of a customizable approach approach to dealing with burnout in the workplace. It definitely has to be company-wide, meaning we have to start everywhere at the same time. It cannot cascade, whether it's cascading up to down or down to up. It needs to be, everyone at the same time. But a better approach would be to have in-house coaches who can address people's concerns one-on-one or maybe in smaller groups. This would give a chance for employees to feel seen and heard and come up with, customizable action plans to deal with what is going on. And also, I think organizations have to really think of their new normal. We cannot go to life as it was before COVID-19. We just can't. That's the reality. So we have to figure out what is the new normal. And it's going to be dynamic and it's going to be fluid. And we have to be open to that. Of course, this puts additional burden and it requires additional effort from management to figure it out and maybe to pivot their approaches from day to day sometimes. But this is how it's going to be. Flexible work environment is going to become, a standard working condition. Emotions in the workplace. We can no longer avoid or act as if the workplace does not have emotions, and that when the employee comes into the office in the morning, he is not carrying all of his emotions with him. So emotional learning is an important skill that really development programs within organizations should address head on for everyone within the organization. And, we have to really work with our managers and our leaders because burnout can be handed down from the manager onto the employees. And then it has this rippling effect throughout the entire organization. So again, one size fits all is not going to work. Trying to, stubbornly push back to the way it was before the pandemic, to how we worked before the pandemic, to how we managed before the pandemic, to productivity measures before the pandemic really isn't going to be helpful. And also approaching it as an objective with KPIs, I don't think it's going to be helpful. We need to have a human approach to this issue of burnout in the workplace. We have to see our employees as human beings and deal with them as human beings, and human beings are unique. And therefore, the approach to dealing with burnout needs to be unique for each individual. And I think the most effective way to deal with this is to have in-house coaching and also to educate managers and leaders on coaching concepts and helping them learn coaching skills and coaching capabilities. Last but not least, I think that what we are experiencing now will persist for a little bit, and whether it is burnout or not burnout, because what we are experiencing, it's not just stress, it's more of an existential crisis. Because of the pandemic, we've been pushed to ask questions that we might not have addressed before. Everything that we took for granted was taken away from us. So now we know the value of those things or those relationships, those activities. We're going to start to reevaluate how we live our lives, and a lot of us are going to be pushed to make some transformations in their lives, how they live their lives and how they work. And I think we're going to see the ripple effects of the pandemic. It will continue for at least another 18 months, in my opinion. So very briefly, this was my stance on why burnout will continue to propagate within the corporate world despite company efforts to address this corporate pandemic. Thank you for listening, and I hope it was beneficial.